The little black girl asked the biker for help after workers cornered her, accusing her of sabotaging ship equipment. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. In the bustling shipyard, a place where large vessels were prepared for their voyages, chaos had begun to unfold. Amid the loud clanging of machinery, the hum of large engines, and the heavy, salty air of the docks, a young girl, no older than 10, ran desperately between the rows of workers. Tears streaked down her face, and her small feet barely managed to keep up as she hurried toward a group of bikers sitting at a nearby bar, taking a break from their ride. She was frightened, but the fear in her eyes was not just from running. It was the kind of terror that only comes when you know you are in a situation with no way out. "Please, help me," she cried, her voice trembling. The bikers looked up in surprise as she reached them, her face smeared with dirt and her clothes torn. Without hesitation, one of the bikers, a man named Jake, stood up, sensing something wasn't right. "What happened, kid?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "They say I broke the ship," the girl sobbed, her words coming out in gasps. "They say I ruined the equipment, but I didn't. I swear. Please, you have to help me." The bikers exchanged confused glances. This wasn't a typical situation, but the look in her eyes told them everything they needed to know. She wasn't lying, and she needed them. "Who's accusing you?" Jake asked, his tone now more serious. "The workers. They said I sabotaged the equipment. They were shouting, and I tried to stop them, but they wouldn't listen," she replied, her voice shaking as she clung to the edge of Jake's leather vest. "What's your name, kid?" Jake asked, bending down so he was eye level with her. "Maya," she whispered, looking down, trying to hide the tears that still fell freely. "Maya, don't worry. We're gonna help you. Just stay close to us," Jake reassured her. The other bikers stood up and surrounded her protectively. Something about the situation didn't sit right with them. Why was a young girl being blamed for something as serious as sabotaging expensive equipment? The whole thing seemed off. Maya led the bikers to the shipyard, her small feet moving quickly as she glanced over her shoulder every now and then to make sure the workers weren't following her. The workers were busy near the ship, shouting at each other about the damage to the equipment. Maya had no idea how the ship's parts got damaged, but she knew it wasn't her fault. She had been helping out at the shipyard for a few weeks now, doing small tasks to help her family. She never thought she'd be accused of something like this, especially by grown men who were supposed to protect the workers. The bikers watched from a distance as Maya pointed to the group of workers. They could see the tension in the air, the harsh words being exchanged. Maya's heart raced, and she squeezed her hands into fists at her sides. Jake stepped forward, his face hardening with resolve. "I think it's time we talk to these guys," he muttered. With that, he walked towards the group of workers, his boots making a steady rhythm on the ground. The workers paused when they saw the bikers approach. A few of them looked nervous, but they quickly composed themselves, standing taller as if to assert their dominance over the situation. "Hey," Jake called out, his voice cutting through the air. The workers turned toward him, and one of them, a tall man with a thick beard, stepped forward. "What's this? You're not welcome here," the man growled, his eyes narrowing. Jake stood tall, unafraid. "We're here to talk to you about a little girl you've been bullying," he said, his voice steady. "Maya didn't do anything to the ship. You need to leave her alone." The worker snorted and stepped closer, clearly unfazed by the bikers. "This doesn't concern you, buddy. Go back to your little club and mind your business." But Jake wasn't backing down. "Maya is our business now," he replied, his tone low and threatening. The other bikers spread out behind him, silently signaling that they weren't going anywhere. The workers exchanged uncertain looks. One by one, the workers began to back off, realizing they were outnumbered. "You should have listened to her from the start," Jake said, turning his back to them. "Get your act together, or you'll have more to deal with than just us." With that, the bikers led Maya away from the shipyard, their mission accomplished, for now. But the feeling that something bigger was at play lingered in the air. As they rode off into the night, Maya felt a sense of relief. knowing that she wasn't alone anymore. She had the bikers on her side, and that made all the difference. I can't begin to imagine what it feels like to be in a situation where your life is turned upside down, especially when you're a kid. Maya had no idea that what started as a normal day at the docks would end with her running for her life, asking strangers for help. The bikers had just pulled away from the docks, their engines roaring as they headed out of the chaos. As they rode, Maya clung to Jake's leather jacket, her small hands gripping tightly as the wind whipped past them. She had been so scared, but now, with Jake and his crew around her, she felt like maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. They headed to a nearby diner, one that Jake often stopped at after long rides, to regroup and figure out what to do next. The bikers parked their motorcycles outside, the sound of the engines fading into the background as they entered the diner. Maya was still in shock, but she sat at the table with them, feeling a little safer with each passing minute. She had told them everything she could remember about the workers accusing her of sabotage. Her mind raced, thinking about the damage to the ship and the way they had shouted at her. Maya couldn't understand why they would blame her when all she had done was help out. "They didn't even listen to me," Maya said, her voice shaking. "They just kept yelling, saying I ruined everything. I didn't do anything wrong." Jake leaned back in his chair, his eyes focused on her. "I believe you, Maya. We're gonna figure this out, okay? You're not in this alone," he said, his voice steady and comforting. Maya nodded, though. She still felt the weight of the accusations heavy on her chest. She had been trying to help at the docks, trying to support her family by doing small jobs, but now it felt like she had made everything worse. One of the other bikers, a woman named Crow, sat next to Maya and put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "The truth will come out, kid. Don't worry," she said softly. "You've got us now." Maya looked up at Crow, seeing the kindness in her eyes. For the first time in hours, she felt a little less afraid. "We'll need to talk to the people in charge at the docks," Jake said, breaking the silence. "Find out who's really behind this. The workers, they may be the ones accusing you, but they're not the ones calling the shots. We'll go up the chain, see what we can find." Maya nodded, relieved that someone was finally going to take her side. As the bikers planned their next steps, Maya's mind kept returning to the workers who had surrounded her earlier. The look in their eyes had been filled with anger, like they already knew the story they wanted to tell. Maya felt like an easy target, someone who could be blamed for something that wasn't her fault. "What do we do now?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We keep going," Jake said. "We don't stop until we get answers. Nobody's gonna pin this on you, Maya. Not while we're around." The bikers finished their meal quickly, their conversation turning to strategy. They needed to be careful, to keep everything above board. They couldn't let the situation escalate into violence, no matter how much they wanted to protect Maya. As they left the diner, the air had cooled and the sun had started to set. It was the perfect time to get back on the road. Jake led the way, his Harley's headlights cutting through the growing darkness. The other bikers followed, the convoy moving like a well-oiled machine. They were headed back to the docks, but this time, they weren't just visiting. They had a purpose. Maya, still sitting behind Jake, felt a mix of fear and determination. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but for the first time that day, she felt like she had a chance. The bikers were on her side, and they were going to make sure the truth came out. As they neared the docks, the tension in the air thickened. Jake signaled for the bikers to stop, and they parked their bikes in a small lot near the edge of the dockyard. Maya could see the workers in the distance, still gathered around the ship, talking among themselves. They didn't notice the bikers at first, too caught up in their own conversation. But when Jake and the others approached, the workers' heads turned. Maya's heart raced as she walked alongside Jake, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on her. One of the workers, the same man who had been the loudest in accusing her earlier, stepped forward. His expression hardened as he saw the bikers. "What do you think you're doing here?" the man asked, his voice dripping with disdain. "This doesn't concern you. You can't just show up here and make threats." Jake stood tall, his posture unwavering. "We're here for Maya," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You've got some explaining to do." The worker sneered. "She's the one who ruined the equipment. She's the one who—" Jake cut him off, his voice rising. "No, you listen. Maya didn't do anything. Now, we're going to find out who's really responsible. And if you don't want this to get ugly, you're going to back off." The worker took a step back, his jaw tightening. It was clear that the tension had reached a breaking point. Maya felt a surge of hope rise within her. She wasn't alone anymore. The bikers had her back, and they weren't going to let her be the scapegoat for something she didn't do. I tensed up as Maya stood beside Jake. Her eyes locked on the group of workers that had accused her. The confrontation had escalated quickly, and it was clear that the bikers weren't leaving without getting some answers. The worker who had been most vocal about accusing Maya stepped back, realizing that the bikers weren't going to back down. Jake was calm but firm, his posture as solid as a rock. "You've got two options," Jake said, his voice deep with authority. "You can either tell us the truth about what happened, or we can take this to a whole new level. Your choice." The worker swallowed, his face reddening as he glanced at the other men. They were backing off, not wanting to get caught up in whatever Jake had planned. The tension in the air was thick, and for the first time, Maya felt like she wasn't alone. She wasn't a victim anymore. She had a team behind her. The worker sneered but took a step back. "You don't scare me, biker," he spat. "We've got nothing to hide. Maya's the one who messed up the equipment. She's the one who sabotaged it." Jake shook his head, his eyes narrowing. "Then why hasn't anyone explained how the damage happened? Why are you so quick to blame her without any evidence?" Jake's voice was a calm storm, and the workers seemed to shrink under his gaze. "We've been doing this long enough to know when something's off," Jake continued. "You can either come clean, or we'll find someone who will." The group of workers exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, one of the men, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "We didn't see her do anything," he said, his voice hesitant. "But she was the last one near the equipment. It was just a gut feeling." Jake's eyes flickered with disbelief. "A gut feeling? That's the best you've got?" The man hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Yeah, I guess, but we didn't know who else to blame. We saw her near the equipment, and then everything went wrong. It's not like we have a better explanation." Jake turned to Maya, who was standing quietly, trying to hold back tears. "Maya, you didn't do anything, did you?" Maya shook her head quickly. "No, I swear. I didn't touch anything. I just helped clean up, that's all." Jake placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but kind. "I believe you, Maya, and we're going to get this figured out." The bikers were quiet, but it was clear that they weren't going to let this go. They had come too far, and they weren't going to stop until Maya was exonerated. Jake turned back to the workers. "You're going to give her a fair chance, or we'll make sure the entire dockyard knows what happened here," he said. "This isn't over." The workers remained silent, but it was clear that their facade of authority was crumbling. They had no real proof, just assumptions and gut feelings. And now, they were starting to realize that they might have made a mistake. Maya had been an easy scapegoat, but the bikers weren't going to let her take the fall for something she didn't do. As Jake and the other bikers turned to leave, one of the workers, a younger man, spoke up. "Wait, maybe we were wrong," he said softly. "Maybe we were too quick to judge." Jake nodded. "It's not too late to do the right thing," he said, his tone softer now. The worker seemed to take a step forward, but before he could say anything more, one of the older workers interrupted. "Enough. Let's just forget about this," he snapped, clearly uncomfortable with the growing tension. "It's over." Maya looked at Jake, her heart still racing. "Do you think they'll stop accusing me?" she asked quietly. Jake nodded. "They might not admit it right away, but the truth always comes out in the end." As they walked back to the bikes, Jake felt the weight of the situation still hanging in the air. They had made progress, but there was still more to do. They couldn't stop here. Not when Maya's reputation was still at stake. The bikers mounted their bikes, the sound of engines roaring to life once again. But this time, it wasn't just a ride. It was a mission. They weren't just going back to the club. They were going to make sure that Maya's name was cleared, no matter what it took. As they left the docks behind, Maya looked up at the sky, feeling the cool evening breeze against her skin. She was no longer alone. The bikers had her back, and she wasn't going to let them down. They were fighting for her, and she was ready to fight for herself. The journey wasn't over, but with Jake and the others by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. The night had fallen, and the roads ahead were dark, but for the first time in hours, Maya felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was part of something bigger, a family that would protect her no matter what. I can feel the tension still hanging in the air as Maya sat on the back of Jake's bike. the road winding ahead of them like an endless ribbon in the night. The bikers had made it clear to the workers that they weren't going to let Maya take the fall for something she didn't do. But as they rode away from the docks, the weight of the situation still pressed heavily on Maya's chest. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the accusations, to the looks the workers had given her, to the way they had so easily blamed her. But now, with Jake and the bikers by her side, she felt a sense of hope she hadn't known in hours. The ride was long, the wind biting at her face, but she could feel the comfort of knowing she was not alone. Jake led the group down the highway, his Harley's engine purring steadily beneath him. The others followed, each rider a silent guardian, their expressions focused as the road stretched ahead. Maya clung to Jake's back, trying to steady her thoughts. She had never been so scared in her life, but now, with the bikers' promise to help her, she was starting to believe that maybe things could get better. They didn't stop until they reached a quiet motel on the outskirts of town, a place Jake often visited when they needed a break from the chaos. It was far from fancy, but it was safe, and that's all that mattered. As the bikers parked their bikes, the sound of their engines fading into the night, Maya felt a sense of relief wash over her. The constant fear that had gripped her chest seemed to loosen just a little. She wasn't alone anymore. The bikers had become her family, and they had promised to protect her. They entered the motel's small office, where an older man behind the counter gave them a nod of recognition. Jake spoke to him briefly, securing rooms for the night. As they gathered in the lobby, the bikers fell into their usual quiet rhythm. Maya couldn't help but feel both grateful and overwhelmed by all of them. These weren't just rough, tough bikers. They were people who had chosen to help her, to fight for her. And they weren't backing down. After they settled into their rooms, Jake and the others gathered in the small, dimly lit common area. Maya sat with them, still quiet, her mind racing. Jake turned to her, his face softening for the first time that night. "You're safe here, Maya," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "We're not going to let anyone hurt you, but we need to figure out what's really going on." Maya nodded, her eyes downcast. "I don't know what to do," she said softly. "They're saying I did something wrong, but I didn't. I just don't understand why they're blaming me." The other bikers were quiet for a moment, each of them processing the situation. Then, Crow, one of the older members, spoke up. "It doesn't matter what they say," she said with a calm confidence. "You didn't do anything wrong, Maya. We know that. But the people who are accusing you need to be held accountable for what they've done." Jake nodded in agreement. "We'll figure it out. But we need to go back to the docks tomorrow, talk to the right people, and make sure this gets straightened out. No one's going to let them take advantage of you." Maya looked up at them, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Jake smiled, a reassuring look in his eyes. "You don't have to do anything alone anymore." As the night wore on, Maya tried to sleep, but the events of the day played through her mind like a broken record. She kept thinking about the workers and the way they had accused her so quickly, without any proof. She wondered if they really believed she was the one responsible or if they just needed someone to blame. But no matter how much she tried to make sense of it, one thing was clear: she wasn't going to let them win. The next morning, the bikers were ready to head back to the docks. Maya felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach, but she pushed it aside. She wasn't backing down. The ride back was quieter than before, the weight of the day ahead hanging in the air. When they reached the docks, Maya felt a surge of determination. She wasn't a scared little girl anymore. She was part of something bigger, and she was going to fight for herself. The bikers rolled into the parking lot, their motorcycles parked with military precision. The workers were still there, some of them looking over the equipment, others just standing around, talking. When they saw the bikers approaching, they immediately stopped what they were doing. The same man who had accused Maya earlier stepped forward. He didn't seem as sure of himself now, not with Jake and the others in front of him. "You need to leave," he said, trying to sound tough, but there was a noticeable tremble in his voice. Jake stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "We're here to make sure the truth comes out," he said, "and we're not going anywhere until it does." The worker didn't say anything, but his eyes flickered nervously. Maya stepped forward, standing tall beside Jake. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said, her voice strong. "And I'm not going to let you accuse me without proof anymore." The workers exchanged uncertain glances, but Maya could see the cracks in their facade. They were starting to realize that the bikers weren't going to let them get away with this. The worker who had been the loudest in accusing her took a deep breath and looked away. "We didn't mean to," he started, but his words trailed off, his confidence failing him. Jake's voice was steady, but firm. "It's not too late to do the right thing. All we need is the truth." The workers stood in silence for a moment, before one of them finally spoke up. "We were wrong," he said, his voice low. "Maya didn't do anything. We jumped to conclusions." Maya felt a weight lift off her shoulders as the truth finally started to come to light. She wasn't the one to blame. The bikers had fought for her, and now, the workers were starting to admit their mistake. It was a quiet moment, the kind where you can finally feel the weight of what's been happening. The workers had admitted their mistake, but that wasn't enough. Maya knew she still had to be careful, even if things were starting to settle down. The bikers gathered around, their engines quiet for the moment, the air thick with the smell of gasoline and salt water. Maya stood beside Jake, her hands nervously gripping the hem of her jacket. It had been a long day, and she was still trying to process everything that had happened. She had been accused, blamed for something she didn't do, and for a while, it seemed like no one was going to believe her. But now, with the bikers standing by her, things were starting to change. "They're backing off," Jake said, his voice calm but with a hint of satisfaction. The workers, who had once been so sure of themselves, now looked uneasy. They didn't know how to handle the bikers, or how to face Maya after everything that had happened. "But that's not enough," Maya said softly, her voice filled with determination. "I need more than just an apology. I need them to be held accountable." Jake nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "We'll make sure they do," he said. "This isn't just about clearing your name. It's about making sure they know they can't just push people around. You've got a lot of people behind you now, Maya." The other bikers murmured their agreement, their expressions hardening. Maya felt a warmth in her chest, realizing that she wasn't alone in this fight. She had a family now, a group of people who would stand by her no matter what. The workers shifted uneasily, and the man who had first accused her stepped forward again, his face still red with embarrassment. We didn't mean to accuse you like that," he said, his voice faltering. "We just thought." He trailed off, clearly unable to finish the sentence. Maya didn't need him to explain. She had already heard enough. "You thought wrong," she said, her voice steady but firm. "You accused me without evidence, without even listening to my side of the story. You can't just treat people like that and expect everything to be okay." There was a long silence as the workers exchanged glances. Finally, one of them spoke up. "You're right," he said, his tone quiet but sincere. "We should have done better. We're sorry." Maya didn't say anything for a moment. She was still processing the apology, still trying to make sense of everything. But she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over yet. The bikers weren't going to let it end like this. Jake stepped forward, his voice taking on a commanding tone. "We've got more to talk about," he said. "This is just the beginning. We're going to make sure this doesn't happen again, to Maya or anyone else. And we'll make sure you know what happens when you try to pull something like this." The workers were visibly nervous now, their eyes darting between each other. Jake didn't wait for them to respond. "Maya, let's go," he said, turning toward the parking lot. Maya followed him, feeling a strange mix of relief and unease. She wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but she knew that Jake and the bikers had her back. And that was enough for now. As they walked to the bikes, Maya glanced over her shoulder. The workers were still standing there, clearly uncomfortable with the way things had gone down. But Maya didn't care about them anymore. She cared about moving forward, about making sure this didn't happen again. She mounted her bike, Jake right behind her. The engines roared to life, filling the air with their deep, rumbling sound. The bikers were ready to go. Maya felt the wind whip through her hair as they sped down the road, leaving the docks behind. It felt like a fresh start, like she was finally free from the weight of the accusations. But there was still work to be done. The bikers weren't done yet. As they rode, Jake turned to her. "You did good, Maya," he said, his voice carrying over the roar of the engine. Maya looked at him, her face filled with determination. "We're not done yet," she said. "We'll make sure they never do this to anyone again." Jake nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You got it." The convoy of bikers sped into the distance, the open road ahead of them. They were more than just a group of people on motorcycles. They were a family, a family that would protect each other no matter what. Maya felt a sense of peace settle over her as they rode. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, about showing the world that they couldn't be pushed around. And Maya, for the first time in a long while, felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. I could feel the tension lift off my shoulders as the road stretched out ahead of us. The bikers had done it again, stood up for what was right, and put everything on the line to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves. Maya sat behind me, her hands gripping my jacket, but this time, her grip wasn't out of fear. It was out of trust, and that felt different, good, like we were finally moving toward something better. The convoy of bikes roared down the highway, the wind whipping through the air, making the night feel like a new beginning. Maya had been through a lot, but now she was on the road to something else, something free of blame and lies. We headed to a small motel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough for what we needed. The bikes parked in a line outside, their chrome gleaming under the soft light from the street lamps. As we walked into the motel, I could see Maya looking around, still adjusting to the fact that she wasn't facing this alone anymore. "You okay?" I asked her as we entered the lobby. Maya gave a small smile, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "Yeah, I think I am," she said quietly, but there was a steadiness to her voice now that hadn't been there before. She wasn't the scared little girl from the docks anymore. "You did good today," I said as we checked in. "You stood up for yourself." Maya nodded, but there was something else on her mind. "Do you think they'll really leave me alone now?" she asked, her voice full of uncertainty. "I mean, they've apologized, but how do I know they won't just keep doing it?" I paused for a moment. She was right to ask that question. Apologies were easy, but change was harder. They might try to brush it off. But you've got people who care now, Maya. We'll make sure they don't just walk away from this. We'll keep them honest. I meant it. I wasn't going to let anyone treat her like that again. After we got our rooms, the bikers gathered in the small common area of the motel, exchanging quiet words and making sure everything was in order. It had been a long ride, but we weren't done yet. This wasn't over. Not until Maya was safe. I looked over at the crew, the men and women who had backed us up from the start. They weren't just bikers. They were a family. "We'll head back to the docks tomorrow, see if we can find out what really happened," I said to the group. "But this time, we're going to make sure everyone knows the truth. Maya deserves that." They all nodded, their faces serious. This wasn't just about clearing Maya's name. It was about justice. After a long day, everyone headed back to their rooms to rest, but I could tell none of us were really going to sleep easy. Maya was still on my mind. I walked over to her room, knocking softly on the door. When she opened it, she was sitting on the bed, looking out the window at the dark sky. "Hey," I said, stepping in. "You okay?" She gave me a small smile. "Yeah, just thinking." She looked at me, her eyes a little more settled than before. I never thought something like this would happen to me. I didn't think people could be so cruel, just accusing me of something without even asking. I didn't know what to do. "It's not your fault," I said, sitting down next to her. "You're not the one who did anything wrong. They were wrong. They jumped to conclusions, and you paid the price for it. But that's not the end of your story, Maya. You've got a chance to turn things around, and we're going to make sure you do." She looked at me, her eyes reflecting something I hadn't seen before, hope. "Thanks, Jake. I don't know what I would have done if you all hadn't shown up." I put a hand on her shoulder. "That's what family does. We show up, and we don't back down." The next morning, we got up early and headed back to the docks. This time, we weren't just there to clear Maya's name. We were there to make sure the workers knew that they couldn't treat people like this without consequences. The workers were still there, just as we expected. When they saw us roll in, they froze. This time, it wasn't just a few bikers. It was the whole crew, and we were ready. Maya stood beside me as we approached the workers. She was quiet, but there was strength in her stance now. She wasn't the scared girl from the docks anymore. She was ready to face them. One of the workers, the one who had been the loudest in accusing Maya, stepped forward. His face was tight with embarrassment, but he wasn't backing down. "We already apologized," he said, his voice rough. "What more do you want?" Maya stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "I want you to understand that this isn't just about me," she said, her voice strong. "You can't just treat people like this, blame them for things they didn't do. What if it was you? Would you want to be treated like this?" The worker didn't say anything at first, but then, slowly, he nodded. We didn't mean to, he muttered. Maya's eyes softened. I know you didn't. But now you know better. And you need to do better. There was a long silence, and for the first time, the workers seemed to realize the weight of what they had done. They had accused a child without cause, and they had tried to make her the scapegoat for something they didn't understand. Maya wasn't going to let them off the hook. And neither was I. As the bikers turned to leave, I could see Maya looking at the workers one last time. They didn't say anything else, but there was a shift in the air. They knew they had been wrong. They had learned something that day, and I hoped they would never forget it. I could feel the weight of the night lifting as we rode down the road toward the horizon. Maya was quieter now, but there was a calm about her that I hadn't seen before. The tension that had gripped her for days, maybe longer, was slowly starting to melt away. She wasn't just a victim of someone else's mistake anymore. She was standing on her own 2 feet, surrounded by people who cared about her. As the bikes roared down the highway, I couldn't help but feel proud of what we had done for her. We hadn't just cleared her name. We had shown her that no one gets left behind. Maya wasn't the same scared girl who had run to us for help. She had become part of this family, this group of bikers who understood the value of loyalty, of standing up for the people who couldn't stand up for themselves. We made it to a new town, the sun just beginning to set behind us. It was a small place, a crossroads town with a few shops, a diner, and not much else. The kind of town that faded into the background if you didn't pay attention. But that didn't matter now. Maya wasn't just a girl running away from accusations anymore. She had a future to look forward to. We parked our bikes outside the diner, the sound of their engines cutting off as we dismounted. Maya stepped off the back of my bike, looking around with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. It's quiet here, she said, glancing at the small town that stretched out before her. Yeah, I said, locking my bike. Sometimes that's just what you need. Quiet. We walked into the diner, the bell above the door jingling as we entered. The air smelled of coffee and fried food, the kind of place that was familiar, where everyone knew everyone else. The waitress behind the counter gave us a smile, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes as she looked at our leather jackets and the bikes parked outside. What can I get you? She asked, her voice warm but cautious. Maya and I sat at the counter, the other bikers filling up the back booths, chatting quietly. I could see Maya glancing around, taking everything in. You doing okay? I asked her as the waitress brought over 2 cups of coffee. Maya nodded slowly, her eyes still distant. I think so, she said quietly. I can't believe it's over. I feel like I'm waiting for something else to go wrong. I smiled gently, giving her a reassuring look. Nothing else is going to go wrong, Maya. You're safe now, and we've got your back. No matter what. She smiled faintly, but I could see the worry still there, lurking just beneath the surface. We finished our meal in comfortable silence, the kind that you can only have when you know that no more lies are coming your way. Maya wasn't looking over her shoulder anymore, wasn't afraid of every passing glance. She was finally free. After we paid, we left the diner and headed back to the bikes. The night had fallen, the stars bright above us, the moon casting a soft light across the road. Where to now? Maya asked as she climbed onto the back of my bike again. We ride, I said simply. We keep going, wherever it takes us. The engines roared to life, and the group of bikers took off down the road, riding through the night. Maya was close behind me, her body pressed against mine as we sped down the highway. It wasn't just about the journey anymore. It was about the people who were on it with her. As we rode, I could see her starting to relax, the weight of everything that had happened fading into the background. She wasn't just a victim anymore, she was a fighter. And she was going to be just fine. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in a while, I wasn't worried about where we were going. I knew we'd get there. We always did. I could feel the cool night air against my face as we rode, the road stretching out ahead of us like a blank canvas. The bikes roared through the darkness, a chorus of freedom and escape. Maya was still behind me, her body pressed against mine as we rode down the endless highway. It had been days since the docks, since the accusations, since the fear and the chaos. Now, the only thing that mattered was the open road and the promise we had made to Maya. She was free, and we were going to keep it that way. We had left behind the small town and the quiet motel, but there was no real destination in mind. It didn't matter where we went. What mattered was that Maya was no longer a victim. She was a fighter, and she had a whole family of bikers who had her back. The group of us rode in formation, the wind whipping past us, the rumble of our engines echoing in the night. The lights of the towns we passed blurred by, nothing more than shadows in the distance. Maya, despite everything that had happened, was still silent, lost in thought. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt uncomfortable, though. It was the silence of someone who was finally processing, finally letting go. I could feel her tension melting, and for the first time, I saw her begin to relax. "You doing okay?" I called out over the roar of my engine, turning my head just enough to catch a glimpse of her behind me. Her response came after a long pause, but when she spoke, it was with a sense of calm that hadn't been there before. "I'm okay," she said softly, but the weight of the words was clear. She was more than okay. She was free. I gave her a quick glance and smiled, knowing that it was more than just a simple response. She had come a long way, and I was proud of her. We had all come a long way. A few hours later, the bikes pulled off onto a quiet road, far from the noise of the cities and the distractions of the world. The night was dark, but the moonlight cut through the trees, casting a soft glow on the road ahead. We had reached a small, secluded park, a place where we could rest for the night. We set up camp quickly, our bikes parked nearby. The fire crackled as we sat around it, the warmth of the flames making the night feel a little less cold. Maya sat on a log, her arms wrapped around her knees as she stared into the fire. The rest of us gave her space, knowing she needed it. The silence was different now. It wasn't the silence of fear or uncertainty. It was the quiet of reflection, of peace. I watched Maya for a moment, wondering what was going through her mind. She had been through so much, and now, for the first time in what felt like forever, she could just breathe. She looked up from the fire, meeting my gaze for the first time since we had stopped. Her eyes were clear, no longer clouded by fear or doubt. "Jake," she said quietly, her voice steady. "Thank you. For everything." I nodded, smiling softly. "No need to thank me. You did the hard part. You stood up for yourself." She looked down, a slight smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I don't think I would have done it without you guys," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was so scared, but you made me feel like I wasn't alone." I knew what she meant. It was one thing to face something on your own, but it was another to have a group of people who had your back, no questions asked. "You're never alone, Maya," I said, my voice firm. "We're a family now, and families protect each other." She nodded, the weight of those words settling in. The other bikers sat around the fire, their faces serious but supportive. We were a family, and we had all chosen to protect her. "What happens now?" Maya asked, her voice quieter this time, almost uncertain. The question hung in the air, but the answer was clear. "Now we keep going," I said, standing up and stretching. "There's more to be done. But for tonight, we rest." The night stretched on, the sounds of the fire and the occasional crack of a branch breaking the silence. We didn't need to talk much. We were all thinking the same thing. We had protected Maya, and we would continue to protect her. Tomorrow, we'd figure out what came next. But for tonight, we had made it. We had won. The road ahead would be long, but we would face it together as a family. And no one would ever be able to break us apart. I could hear the low hum of the bikes as we prepared to head out at dawn. The campfire had burned out, leaving only the faint glow of embers, and the silence of the morning felt like the calm before the storm. Maya had been quiet all night, but I knew she was processing everything that had happened. The night had given her some space to think, to reflect. Now, as the sun slowly started to rise, she seemed ready to face whatever came next. The group was already gathered around the bikes, checking their gear, ready to hit the road. I glanced over at Maya, who was sitting on the edge of the camp, staring off into the distance. "You ready?" I called to her. She nodded, her expression serious. "Yeah, let's do this." There was no hesitation in her voice, no fear. She was ready to move forward. We packed up quickly and hit the road, the sound of the engines filling the quiet morning air. The open highway stretched before us, endless and full of possibility. We didn't know exactly where we were going, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that we were moving forward, together. As we rode, I could feel the bond between us strengthening, the weight of the past few days slowly lifting. Maya wasn't the scared girl anymore. She was strong, determined, and ready to make her own way. She had become part of this family, and we weren't going to let her go. We passed through small towns, the kind where everyone knows everyone's business. I could see people staring as we rolled through, the sight of a dozen bikers on the road impossible to ignore. But we didn't stop. We kept riding, the wind in our faces, the road ahead full of endless possibilities. After a few hours, we reached a small, run-down town. There were no grand buildings here, just a few weathered shops and houses that seemed to have seen better days. We pulled into the only gas station, the sound of our engines echoing in the empty streets. Maya looked around as we dismounted, her eyes scanning the area. "Is this where we're stopping?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. I could tell she wasn't used to small towns like this, where things felt a little more raw, a little more real. "Yeah," I said, glancing around. "It's just a pit stop. We'll grab some food, fuel up, and head out." We made our way into the gas station, the bell above the door jingling as we entered. The smell of coffee and diesel hung in the air, mixing with the faint scent of old paper and dust. A man behind the counter looked up as we walked in, his eyes immediately landing on Maya. He looked at her for a moment, and then back at me, his expression hardening. I could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken question hanging between us. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice flat. "Just a couple of coffee and some gas," I replied, trying to keep the mood light. The man nodded and went about his business, but there was something in the air, a feeling I couldn't shake. Maya looked around nervously, clearly not comfortable. I could see her shifting her weight from foot to foot, her gaze darting to the exit. She was still a kid, and this wasn't her world. She had never been in a place like this before. But she was learning, slowly but surely, how to hold her own. We paid for the gas and coffee, and I led Maya back outside. "You okay?" I asked as we stood by the bikes. She nodded, though I could see the unease in her eyes. "Yeah, just not used to this," she said. "It's different, you know? I'm used to being around people who judge." I gave her a reassuring smile. "You don't have to worry about that with us," I said. "You're with us now, and we've got your back." Maya looked at me, a small but genuine smile spreading across her face. "Thanks, Jake. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't helped me." "You would have made it through, Maya," I said, my voice steady. "But we're here now, and we're not going anywhere." As we hopped back on the bikes and rode out of the small town, I could see Maya beginning to relax. The weight of everything that had happened was still there, but she wasn't carrying it alone anymore. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in a while, Maya wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. We were a family now, and we would face whatever came next together. As we rode on, I couldn't help but feel like we were exactly where we needed to be. There would be more challenges, more obstacles, but we were ready for them. The open road stretched out before us, and we would take it, 1 mile at a time. I could feel the road beneath me, the hum of the engine as we cruised down the endless highway. The wind had picked up again, but it felt different now. The sense of freedom was sharper, the weight of the past few days lighter. Maya, sitting behind me, was no longer the scared girl she had been at the docks. She was becoming part of this journey, part of this family. We had come a long way, and I could see it in her face. The worry that had plagued her was slowly starting to disappear, replaced by a quiet strength. The morning passed quickly as we rode, the landscape changing from open roads to more populated areas. We reached another small town, the kind that seemed to hide in the shadows of bigger cities. The buildings were old, worn down, but there was a kind of charm in the simplicity of it all. Maya looked around, taking in the small-town atmosphere. "It's peaceful here," she said, her voice quiet but thoughtful. I glanced at her over my shoulder. "It's the kind of place where nothing much happens. It's good for thinking, for finding some peace." Maya nodded, her eyes still scanning the town as we rolled through. We stopped at a diner on the corner of the main street. The sign was faded, but the smell of fresh food wafted out as soon as we opened the door. The waitress, a woman in her late 30s, looked up from behind the counter and smiled as we entered. There was a kind of warmth in her greeting, a familiarity. That made the place feel like home. "What can I get you folks?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "2 coffees and some food," I said, taking a seat at the counter. Maya sat next to me, still quiet, but now there was a calm in her posture that hadn't been there before. The waitress brought over our drinks, the warm mugs comforting against our hands. Maya took a sip, her eyes meeting mine for the first time that morning. "I never thought I'd be riding across the country like this," she said, her voice soft. "I mean, I've always wanted to leave, but not like this." I never imagined I'd be here, talking to strangers, asking for help. You're not asking for help anymore, I said, my voice steady. You're living your life the way you want to. And you've got people behind you. People who care. Maya smiled, a small but genuine smile. I think I'm starting to understand that. I've never had people like you before. People who don't just walk away. We sat in silence for a moment, the sound of other customers chatting quietly around us. The diner was peaceful, the kind of place that made you forget about everything else. But even in the stillness, I could feel the tension still there, not just in Maya, but in all of us. There were still things left to do, still roads to travel. We'll keep moving forward, I said, breaking the silence. But for now, let's enjoy this. Take a breath. You've earned it. Maya looked at me, her eyes full of quiet determination. I'm ready for whatever comes next, she said, her voice firm. I'm not going to let anyone push me around again. That's the spirit, I said, nodding. You've got a long road ahead, but you're not alone anymore. As we finished our meal, the bikers gathered outside, ready to hit the road again. Maya and I stood up, stretching our legs after the long ride. I could see the unease that still lingered in her eyes, but it was softer now, like she was learning to handle it. She wasn't looking over her shoulder anymore. We weren't just running anymore. We were moving forward. We mounted our bikes, the engines roaring to life as we headed back out onto the road. The sun was starting to dip behind the horizon, casting a soft glow on everything around us. It was a beautiful sight, the world bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Where to now? Maya asked as we rode down the highway. We keep moving, I said, glancing back at her. We head toward the next town, wherever it is. We'll figure it out when we get there. The road ahead seemed endless, but it didn't feel uncertain. Not anymore. We had each other, and that was enough. The miles stretched out before us, the wind in our faces, the freedom of the road calling us forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were heading somewhere good. Maya was no longer running from her past. She was embracing the future, one ride at a time. And whatever came next, we would face it together. I could feel the weight of the road beneath me as we rolled down the highway, the hum of the bikes becoming the only sound in the night. The sky was clear, the stars sparkling above us like tiny promises of something greater. Maya sat behind me, her hands firm around my waist, the wind whipping her hair. It had been days since we left the quiet diner in that small town, and the road had become more than just a way to escape. It was a new beginning, and Maya was finding her place in it. We had crossed into a new state, and with every passing mile, she seemed more at ease. The look in her eyes had changed from uncertainty to quiet confidence. I could see it. The girl who had once been terrified and unsure was now becoming someone stronger. The road ahead was still long, but I wasn't worried about her anymore. Maya was standing up for herself, and that was something I couldn't ignore. I could see her sitting up straighter now, her back more relaxed, the tension that had once controlled her finally fading. As we continued on, the other bikers in our group stayed close, but the air felt different now. It wasn't just the freedom of the road. It was something deeper. It was the bond that had formed between us all. We weren't just people passing by on bikes anymore. We were a family. And in this family, no one was left behind. The road turned from asphalt to gravel as we entered a small town at the foot of a mountain. The sun was starting to dip behind the peaks, casting long shadows across the street. The buildings here were old, with wooden storefronts and faded signs, but there was a charm to it. It felt like a place where everyone knew each other, where time slowed down just enough for people to notice the little things. We pulled up to a small gas station at the edge of town, the flickering neon sign casting a soft glow over everything. Maya looked around, her eyes scanning the surroundings as we dismounted. It's quiet here, she said, her voice barely audible over the sound of the bike sidling. Yeah, I said, adjusting my leather jacket. Sometimes quiet is exactly what you need. We headed inside, the bell above the door jingling as we entered. The gas station attendant, an older man with gray hair and a weathered face, looked up from behind the counter. His eyes immediately landed on Maya, and for a moment, I could feel the same unease from before. The world wasn't always kind to people like her. But this time, it didn't seem to matter. Maya wasn't the girl who had run from accusations anymore. She was part of something stronger. The man nodded at us and went back to his work, clearly not too concerned with the group of bikers in front of him. Maya seemed to relax a little at that, taking a deep breath and looking around. The place had a comfort to it, the kind that came from familiarity. I like it here, she said softly, almost to herself. I smiled, giving her a nod. Sometimes it's nice to stop and catch your breath. This place has a way of making you feel like you've got time. We paid for gas and a few snacks, then walked outside to where the bikes were parked. The others were already getting ready to leave, checking their gear and making small talk. Maya stood next to me, her hands stuffed into the pockets of her jacket. She seemed different, more at peace. Jake, she said, her voice serious. What happens if they come after me again? What if they don't leave me alone? I looked at her, her eyes filled with a mix of worry and uncertainty, but there was something else. There too. Strength. Determination. If they come after you, Maya, we'll deal with it. But we're not running anymore. You don't have to be scared of that anymore. You're not alone. She met my gaze, and for the first time, I saw it. The fear had been replaced by something stronger. She was ready. I'm not scared, she said, the words almost a promise. And I knew she meant it. The engines roared to life as we headed out again, the night settling in around us. The road was quiet, but the sound of the bikes filled the air like a declaration. We weren't just passing through anymore. We were here to stay. I could feel the change in Maya, but I could also feel it in the air between us all. We were more than just bikers now. We were a family, and that meant we would protect each other no matter what. As the miles slipped by, the world outside seemed to disappear. All that mattered was the road ahead and the people riding beside us. Maya was no longer a girl running away from her past. She was taking control of her future, and nothing was going to stop her. The night stretched on, the darkness wrapping around us like a protective blanket. And for the first time in a long time, I knew we were going to make it. Whatever came next, we would face it together. No one was going to break us apart. We were a family, and nothing was stronger than that. I could feel the momentum building as the miles stretched out ahead of us. The road was open, the sky dark but filled with stars, and the group of bikers moved as one, the roar of the engines becoming a familiar sound that carried us forward. Maya was still behind me, her grip steady, but this time there was something different about her. It wasn't just the quiet confidence that had begun to settle in her posture. It was something deeper. She wasn't just letting the road take her anymore. She was taking control of the ride. The last few days had changed her. The quiet moments had allowed her to reflect, to process everything that had happened. She wasn't the scared girl who had begged for help anymore. She was becoming someone else, someone stronger. The sun was starting to dip. Below the horizon as we passed through a small town, the lights of a few scattered houses casting soft glows into the evening. The air felt cooler now, the kind of crispness that made the world feel fresh and new. Maya had been quiet, lost in thought for most of the ride. But as we approached a stoplight, she spoke up. Jake, she said, her voice hesitant but firm. Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing? I glanced over my shoulder at her, unsure of what she meant, but the uncertainty in her eyes told me she was grappling with something. What do you mean? I asked, keeping my eyes on the road. I don't know, she said, pausing as if searching for the right words. It feels like everything's been leading up to this moment. But what happens next? What do we do when it's all over? Her question hung in the air for a moment, and for the first time since we'd started this journey, I felt a twinge of uncertainty too. I knew we had helped her, and we had kept our promise, but I could understand why Maya was asking. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about finding her place in a world that had been unfair. I thought for a moment before answering. I don't think there's an end to this journey, Maya. You've been given a chance to make your own path, to build your own future. It's not about what happens next, it's about what you decide to do with it. She nodded slowly, as if my words were sinking in, and I could see the doubt in her eyes begin to fade. As we reached a gas station on the outskirts of town, I saw her glance at the small, dimly lit store. It was nothing special, but to her, it was a symbol of something. It was a place where she could stop running. As I filled the bike with gas, Maya stepped away from the group, walking to the edge of the station. I could see her taking a deep breath, as if the weight of everything that had happened was finally starting to settle. I knew she needed this moment. You okay? I called out, keeping my voice low, not wanting to disturb the stillness. She turned to me, a small but genuine smile on her face. Yeah, I think I just needed to get out of my head for a minute. She walked back over to me, her eyes clearer now. Thanks, Jake. I've been holding on to so much for so long, and now I feel like I can finally breathe. I smiled back at her, my heart swelling with pride. You've earned it. You've come a long way, Maya. As we finished up at the gas station, the group gathered around the bikes, ready to keep moving. I could see that the road ahead no longer seemed daunting to Maya. She was ready to face whatever came next. As we pulled out of the gas station, the sky was getting darker, and the world around us seemed to quiet. It felt like we were heading into the unknown, but for the first time, I didn't feel any doubt. We were a family, and that meant we were ready for whatever the world could throw at us. We continued riding through the night, the lights of the town fading into the distance behind us. Maya's presence behind me felt different now. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was part of the journey, part of the path we were all on. We didn't know where the road would take us, but it didn't matter. We would keep riding, keep fighting for what was right. Because that's what family does. And no matter how long the road, or how dark the night, we were in it together. The sound of the engines filled the air, and for the first time, Maya wasn't worried about looking back. She was focused on what lay ahead. And so was I. We had already come so far, and now, nothing could stop us. As the night stretched on, I could feel a sense of peace settle in. The road was long, and there was still much to do, but Maya was no longer running. She was walking her own path, and I knew she would make it. Whatever came next, we would face it together. I could feel the air getting cooler as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sound of our engines reverberated through the night, but the world around us had grown quieter, more peaceful. It was as if the journey had come full circle. Maya, still riding behind me, no longer felt like someone running from her past. She was no longer haunted by the weight of accusations, and for the first time in a long time, I could see the weight of fear lifting from her shoulders. We had been through so much together, from the docks to the quiet motel stops, to the long rides on the open road. We had fought not just for her freedom, but for the right to live without looking over her shoulder. Now, the road ahead seemed endless, but not in a way that was daunting. The distance stretched out like a promise of new beginnings, of paths not yet taken but ready to be carved. Maya had come a long way, but so had I, and so had the rest of the bikers. We were a family, bound together by loyalty, by the understanding that sometimes the road is all you have, but it's enough when you have people to share it with. As the miles passed, I couldn't help but glance back at Maya, the girl who had once been unsure, who had once thought she would never have a place to belong. Her eyes, now steady and calm, told a different story. She was not the same person who had run to us for help. She was strong. She had found her voice, and she was ready for whatever came next. We stopped at a rest area, the dim lights illuminating the cracked pavement beneath our boots. I could hear the soft rustling of leaves in the cool breeze. The other bikers were already gathering around, some talking, others just stretching their legs after the long ride. Maya stepped off the bike, her movements slow but purposeful. She looked up at the sky, taking in the vastness above her. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "It feels like I can breathe again." I smiled and walked over to her, standing beside her as we looked up at the stars. "You can. You've earned it," I said quietly. For the first time, I realized how much she had changed. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living, about choosing her path instead of letting the past dictate who she was going to be. "I don't think I ever really believed I could be free," Maya continued, her voice thoughtful. "But now, with all of you, I feel like I've got a chance, like I can really live." "You always had a chance," I said. "You just needed to believe it. And now you do." Maya looked at me, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I do. I really do." As we stood there, the sound of a motorcycle engine broke the silence. I turned to see one of the bikers approaching. "Jake," the rider called out, "we need to talk. There's something we need to figure out." I nodded, giving Maya a last reassuring look. "Stay here," I said. "We'll be right back." As I walked toward the other biker, I knew that the journey was far from over. There would always be challenges ahead, always things to face and obstacles to overcome. But for Maya, for all of us, there was no going back. We were a family now, and we were stronger than ever. The conversation with the biker was brief, but necessary. There were things we still needed to tie up, loose ends that had to be dealt with. But in the end, it was clear, we had done what we set out to do. Maya was free. And now, The road was ours to travel. When I returned to Maya, she was still standing by the truck, her face lit by the soft glow of the moon. There was a calm about her now, a peace that I hadn't seen before. She had come into her own, found the strength to move on from everything that had held her back. I walked up to her and smiled. Ready to keep going? I asked. She nodded, a quiet determination in her eyes. Yeah, she said. Let's ride. The other bikers gathered around, and one by one, we mounted our bikes. The engines roared to life again, the sound of the road beneath us a constant reminder that we were moving forward. We weren't looking back anymore. Together, we would face whatever came next. The sun had set, and the world felt endless. But in that moment, with Maya riding beside me, it felt like we had already won. The road ahead was long, but it was ours to take. The journey was just beginning, and I knew that no matter what came next, we would be ready. Together, we were unstoppable,